Do you want me to intro each other or each other?
I mean, I can do it.
You do it. Go for it.
Great.
She's been all set. Oh, wow. Okay, great.
What were you saying?
Do you want to wait 1 minute until, I think, I was going to make sure that, I think a couple people have just parked in the car. Can we wait for
Sure,
them?
absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great.
Wait, actually, we just hit one.
Okay, go ahead. You
Okay,
start.
great.
Run.
Thanks,
Run.
Misty.
Cool. Welcome to Zibby's. Thank you so much for coming. We're super excited to be hosting 2 Jens tonight, which is very exciting to celebrate this great book, Breakproof. I know a lot of people have been really inspired by this story, so I'll sort of hand it over. Come buy books at the front afterwards, and otherwise enjoy the event.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna start by I'm gonna take the mic or the pretend mic here for a moment and just give a very quick introduction on the star of the hour, and it's Jenn Drummond. If you guys have not read her book Breakproof, I highly do recommend it. This is not just me being polite. I marvel at Jenn because her story is so extraordinary and so it's just marvelous. And this is a woman who has 7 children and is the first woman ever, broke the world record of climbing all 7-second summits. And the story of how she did it, her perseverance, her resilience is just incredible. And her book is just filled with tips and tricks and strategies of how she was able to overcome them and do them. You know how I love the story of at the park. We're going to talk about that with the stepper. And like I said, Jenn is a true badass. That name is used way too much, and it's become just a very silly hashtag. But this woman embodies that 100%. So I'm so honored to be sitting here with you, talking to you. I'm going to be interviewing you, and it is just an honor so thank you for having me here tonight with you.
Thank you for being here. Jenn and I met back in the fall, and I mean, I kind of had an affinity for her because she had the same first name as me. But then when we were interviewing on each other's podcast, she has Habits and Hustles, and when I was watching her Instagram feed, you get the real deal. Like, it's not the show stuff. It's, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's how it's going. Here's real life. And we should be here living a bigger, better, bolder story that's in all of us. That the little habits that you do create the story that you live. And she embodies that. So
Thank you.
Yay.
What a love fest this is.
Yes.
So how does this typically happen? Can I just go into just asking Jenn a bunch of questions? Is that all right? Okay. So I think the first obvious question is, how did you even think that you could even take on this crazy monumental task of climbing all these mountains when you have a family of 7 children, and have it where did the idea come from, and what was the first step?
Okay. So the idea came from that my house is chaotic and I wanted something quiet. And so I'm like, where do I find peace? And how does the thing be significant enough to warrant time away from my family? But the truth of the origin is I was in a horrific car crash in 2018. It should have taken my life. And to this day, we don't know why it didn't. The accident's been rebuilt every single way. There's not a scenario where I walked away, let alone lived. Here I am. So when those type of events happen, all of a sudden life changes, right? I want to do something significant. I'm here. I was saved. There's a purpose. There's a reason. And so 2019 was the year of the bucket list. What do I want to do, see, experience, try, explore? And on that list was climb a mountain. And in 2020, I was turning 40. I'm like, I'm going to climb a mountain for my 40th birthday and launch that next decade of life. And so I live in Park City, Utah, and mountaineers are a dime a dozen. And I asked friends, I'm like, hey, if you could climb one mountain in the whole world, what would you climb? And the general consensus was a mountain named Ama Dablam. It's located in Nepal. It means the mother's necklace. And at the time, people told me it was the Paramount Pictures logo. So every time I go to a movie, I can be like, hey, I climbed that mountain. Pretty cool. Well, if we remember back to the beginning of 2020, COVID happened. And so I'm not climbing anything or traveling anywhere. In fact, I'm homeschooling 7 beautiful children. And one day, one of my guys was struggling with his homework. I'm like, listen, buddy, we do hard things. You've got this. And this little guy looks back at me and he goes, Mom, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest? And I listen, I'm like, I'm a dumb blonde. I'm a dumb blonde. I'm a da blom, honey. Not I'm a dumb blonde.
That's so funny.
But thank you. We'll look at Everest. So he finished his homework. We looked at Everest. I called the coach and he's like, yeah, I can get you ready. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to climb Everest and I'm going to show him that whatever Everest is, we can climb it. So this coach tells me to buy this book about becoming an uphill athlete. I must have been having a terrible day because I'm reading this book and in the front of it, there's a story of a lady who got a Guinness World Record for doing something in the Alps kind of recently. And I'm talking to my coach. I'm like, I could have done that. Like I can suffer. And if I got a Guinness World Record, my kids would actually think I'm cool because that's what they learn to read on is those darn books. And my coach is like, okay, cool. I'll think of something. I'm like, all right, fine. And then a few weeks later, he calls me back and he's all excited. He's like, Jen, I have the perfect world record for you. I think you should be the first female to climb the 7-second summits. I'm like, I don't even know what you just said. Like, what? The 7 what? He's like, let me tell you, that's the second highest point on each of the 7 continents. It's actually harder than the first 7. It's been done by one male. And if you think about it, 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 children, kind of sounds like a jackpot. I'm like, it does. I haven't slept in a tent before, but that's not a problem, right? Like, we'll figure this out. And we started the pursuit, and on June 1st of 2023, I finished.
That's unbelievable. Can you talk about the train? When Jen was on the podcast, my podcast, I just hammered you on how you the actual tactical ways you did it because your schedule is not it takes so much hours of training and time. And when you have a family and you have 7 children, how were you able to even properly train because of the altitude? There's so many things that you don't think about when you have to do such things. How did you train? How did you find time?
Yes. So time was hard, but I would turn I had a coach because it just allowed me to place some confidence in their abilities because they have trained people to climb these mountains before. So I'm like, okay, if they know what they've done, I can lean on that and build my confidence from them.
Wait, so did they put out a whole program for you to follow, or was it how did you work with the coach?
Every week we would kind of look at okay, here's where we're leaving to climb. Here's where you are today. Okay. How do we close this gap and get you ready? And so I would be like, okay, here's my work schedule. Here's my kids' schedule. Figure out how to get the workouts in. And my coach is like, I don't know if you're going to climb an anthill, but the things you signed up for, this isn't going to work. And I'm like, well, it has to work. So what are our options? And I kind of talk about it in the book. When you commit to your commitments and you say I'm doing this thing, you find options because the option isn't to quit. The option is to find a solution with your current restrictions. And so we would look at my calendar and be, oh, guess what? This meeting can be done on Zoom and you don't need to be on camera. So you can be on a treadmill at an angle and walk that entire meeting and get some training in. Hey, guess what? Junior's playing soccer.
I love this.
And so why don't you bring a table or a 12-inch step, fill a backpack full of water bottles, and that entire hour and a half, just do little step-ups on that thing. And that will help with your training. And so we would look at ways to bundle all this stuff. It was very rare that I got those sexy 9-hour hikes that I was out in the wilderness doing them by myself. I would get the time, but it would be batched in little pieces and it would come together like that.
For whatever reason, that story of what you did at the soccer, at the soccer practices, really just, I don't know, it clicked in my head because there's so much time that people think that they don't have. But if you really think of how to multitask, you can get so much accomplished, right? I think you could just take a stepper. I think about that now. If I go to my kids' soccer games or whatever, I could just take a stepper and get my steps in. And there's always ways to figure things out if you just take that moment and think about it. Give me some other things because tell us about how in terms of acclimation when you're climbing because it's very dangerous to be doing this type of thing. Like people don't forget about the training and the time, but there's also the element of of danger if you're not acclimated. And talk about how you get acclimated when you are training for this.
Yeah. Okay. So I live at altitude, which gives me an advantage, right? I'm at about 6,500 feet. I can get to above 10,000 feet every day pretty easily. I can even drive to it. So it's not like I have to hike to that height.
Where are we at now, by the way, in LA? Does anyone know?
Right now?
Yes.
Sea level.
Sea level.
300
Okay,
feet.
so
60 feet.
thank you. So 10,000. I'm from Canada, by the
We're
way.
about 60 feet.
Okay, so you're at 10,000 in Utah.
I can hike to that.
Okay, what can we hike to? When we go hiking? Where do we hike? How far can we go up a mountain? Okay, that's difficult. Okay, so when I go up the Santa Monica Mountain, I'm okay. So that's just to give you some kind of reference points. Okay, Jen, continue on.
Yeah. So that was a thing for acclimatizing. And I didn't want to be away from my kids for a very long time. So that was a challenge as well, because a mountain like Mount Everest, typically people are gone for 8 weeks. Or you climb K2, people are gone for 8 weeks. I don't have 8 weeks to give. So again, that commit to the commitment. Here's what I'm doing. Let's find a solution. The nice thing is that there's football teams that go play football in Denver, and they come from sea level. And so how are we getting those teams prepared to handle that lack of oxygen environment? Somebody has something that I don't know about. So I called some altitude doctors to figure some of this stuff out. And they're like, hey, you know what? There's a company in New York that builds these tents. And these tents mimic a lack of oxygen environment. And it adds on to the current elevation that you are. I learned this because I almost killed myself the first day I slept in the tent, because I'm like, oh, I live at 6,500. Let's crank that thing to 12,000 the first night. So the first night I'm sleeping at 18,000 something.
Wow.
Because it's added to my current feet. And I'm like, I don't know why I can't breathe. Like, this is crazy. And when you're acclimatizing, you have to go to the bathroom a lot because it's a way that your body's getting rid of the blood pressure and things. I mean, I went into the bathroom like 10 times at night. Like, I think I have a UTI or something. I don't know, doctor. Like, this is not making sense. And then the place called the next day. They're like, well, how was your first night? I'm like, I did not sleep. They're like, what would you dial it to? I'm like, what do you live at? They're like, oh my God, like, well, no wonder you didn't sleep. That's like, no. So we learned, but I used that tent and I could get to 22,000 feet at home. So that
Wow.
made a huge difference, not only from a standpoint of being able to climb the mountain, but now I get to shower longer. I get to sleep in my bed longer. I get to eat food that my body's used to longer. So a lot of people sometimes don't summit these mountains because they get sick. And it's just all these different things. I didn't have that much stress from that type of thing because I could do some of it at home. And so when I went to climb Everest, I did one rotation on the mountain. So I got to base camp. I went up to camp 3 on my first attempt. Started feeling lightheaded and woozy, which means you stop and eat and you stay there as long as you can. And then you head back down to base camp. You have to stay at base camp for at least 3 days because those 3 days allow your body to produce more red blood cells. So now you can go up the mountain higher. And it's kind of a fun metaphor that I use when I talk with businesses and people about sometimes you need to climb down to climb back up. And we always feel like, oh, I need to go from A to Z and it's just going to be this. It's not that. You know, we do this little cha-cha-cha up the mountain. And so that really helped, and genetics help at some level. Some people can do altitude, some people can't.
Yeah, talk about that. I think that's very interesting because how much of it is based on genetics?
I think more than they really know.
Really?
Yeah, because I've been on a lot of expeditions, and you'll have people that can do 5 Ironmans in a row, like this thing in Hawaii that you do each one on each island, and they'll be super fit, and then you get them to 17,000 feet,
They can't do it.
game over. So
So people can do different, obviously, and people who can do that maybe can't do the art or whatever, right? Like it's all different.
it's all different.
Let's talk about the experience while you're doing it, because when Jen was, when I was talking with Jen, and it's in the book as well, like what actually happens when you're doing the climbs, like how you're in base camp. Like, talk about when you put those, you know, when you put the
Yeah, it's stakes in the ground.
sticks in the ground. This is really scary.
Is anybody a climber here? Oh, yay, awesome. What do you climb? Big mountains?
I have been to Everest Base Camp,
Amazing.
but not
Okay.
further than that.
Yes.
Kilimanjaro
Okay.
and some in the Cascades.
Okay. Awesome. We met at Kilimanjaro.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so one of the second summits is called Mount Logan. And Mount Logan is the second highest point for North America. So the highest point would be Denali or McKinley. And Mount Logan is extremely different from that because it's this huge glaciated peak that you have to enter from a plane that drops you off on the glacier. And there might be one other team on this mountain, and you're going 30 miles. So one other team. And what happens is you get dropped off, and the minute you get dropped off, you start building a tent, and then you have to build an ice wall around this tent because you don't want the wind to rip the tent, because then you're done. And then what happens, you set up this tent, you build your ice wall, and then you have all your gear. You're not allowed Sherpa, you're not allowed porters, you have to carry everything yourself. And so because it's such a distance, you have a better chance of success if you ski it. So you put these felt things on the bottom of your skis, and it allows you to ski uphill. And then you carry a sled and you carry a backpack, and you're carrying fuel and dehydrated food and all your clothes and hand warmers and whatever you need for this expedition. And you're planning for 4 weeks, hoping it takes 2. And so we have all this gear. So how you move up the mountain is you take half of your gear, or as much as you can, and you ski it up to a point that you can't go anymore. You dig a hole and you bury it, because otherwise it will blow away. You come back to your little house that you set up, you sleep, you wake up the next day, you take down your house, you ski past the point where you buried your stuff, as far as you can go, you set up your tent again, you build the ice wall again, you go do all the things, you go to bed, you wake up, you go down to where you buried your stuff, you unbury it, and then you bring it up as high as you can and you bury it again. But when you're going up, you're on a glacier and no one's been there. There's no trail, there's no nothing. So every step is a ski pole to the left, to the center, to the right. And if it comes back at you, you trust that it's safe enough for you to go. And if it doesn't come back at you, there's a hole that you're gonna fall through. And so you have to do that the entire way. So you're like, shh, 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 1, shh, 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 2, shh, 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 3. And then what happens about Mount Logan is that you start at about 7,000 feet. It goes up to 18,1, comes back down to 16, and then goes up to 19 something. And the first few camps that you establish, you're in a zone that a helicopter can come rescue. There's no, you can't land a plane any higher in the mountain. So they're going to send a helicopter if something happens. After camp 2, you have this wall that you have to ferry all your gear up. So you hike it up, you come back down, you hike it up, you come back down, and then you set up camp 3. Camp 3 is at 16,000 feet. You go over 18,1, come back down to 16,000 feet. And that gives you camp 4. Then you have camp 5, and then you have the summit push. Well, when you go past this wall of ferrying everything up, you set up camp 3. Once after camp 3, if you go to camp 4, there's no rescue. A helicopter can't go. So you go past like this point, and you have to be ready to either self-arrest, come back, or do whatever. We're making magical time. Feeling pretty good, right? Like, life's on our side, everything's going great, blah, 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 blah. And then, so we think it's going to take us 3 more days to get to the summit based on all the reports that we have. We bring 7 days worth of food because you always want to be safe. So we ferry all that up. We set up camp 3. We get to camp 3. We call into Parks Canada. Hey, we made it. Here's where we are. You have to call in every 12 hours so they know what's going on with you. There's one other team on the mountain, and they were a week ahead of us but got bad weather, so now we're in the same spot. And they put their camp here. We put our camp a little higher, and we're there, and a storm comes in. And this storm comes in for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Now we're starting to ration food. Okay, like what do we have? How much calories? What do we need? How do we stay warm? And on the 4th day, so we have this ice wall that we've built. Normally in Canada, you have a windstorm or you have a snowstorm. We had both. So it was blowing snow in and the wall was collecting it. So it was burying our tent. And so when the tent's buried and the wind's blowing, it's pulling the tent taut. If the tent rips, we're dead. They can't send a helicopter in bad weather. So we have to, every 2 hours, go out, undig the tent, come back in. And it's not like, oh, the tent gets pulled taut every 30 seconds. It's 14, it's 17, it's 34 seconds. It is, I'm in my full-on gear, sleeping bag and everything, so if the tent rips, I have my best chance of living. And you can't mind numb it out because there's nothing consistent to let that happen. The storm ends at 6 o'clock, I remember on Monday night. And we're so far north that it's always light. Like, we need to go down and get food, like now. Okay, I'm not eating Jolly Ranchers like any longer, where this is over. And so the guide is like, yeah, we should go down and get food. And there's only 3 of us that are in a 4-man tent. Because if there's 4 of us, we need 2 tents, we'd have to build 2 igloos, and it just does not make sense. So we go down. We had all these bamboo sticks that tracked where we went. They're all covered in snow. So we have to re-establish what's safe to go down. So we go down to where that wall is. And the guide with us is an expert skier. And he's like, you know what? You and Ryan stand here. Watch for me. If an avalanche comes, keep an eye on me because you're going to be digging me out. So Ryan and I are at the top of the hill with shovels, watching Todd go down. Todd goes down, doesn't trigger an avalanche. We're not allowed to go because the more the surface is skied, the higher the avalanche risk. He grabs a whole bunch of food. Ryan and I have to sit in a spot for 2 hours not moving, right? And it's getting darker, so it's getting colder and all the pieces. Todd gets back up to us. And now we have this path, and we're like, okay, we all agree we're not roping up. Get back as fast as you can on this path because you need to manage your body heat because getting cold is dangerous. So I'm freezing, I'm moving, I get back in. I'm so cold that I roll into the tent with all my stuff on. Like, I don't care, I'm gonna wait till I warm up, take my stuff off. Ryan gets into the tent, Todd gets into the tent. It's like 2 a.m. 4 a.m, Ryan wakes up screaming. He's like, I have frostbite. 10 toes, 10 fingers. And it's black, it's blistering, it's swelling. Ryan's my best friend. I just convinced him to come on this trip. Like, his wife is gonna hate me. Like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? We call Global Rescue. Global Rescue's like, we can't come for another 20, it's gonna take us another day. So we have to keep Ryan calm. They're giving us protocol and what to do to keep him safe. The other team, we were kind of plotting to go together because the more people you are, the safer you are. They decide, because they're running out of time, they're going to do an alpine start to try to hit the top. So an alpine start means you're going lean and mean, and you're not bringing all of your camp gear over this mountain, and you're carrying what you need, and they're hoping they're going to do it in 20 hours. I'm like, okay, sounds good. We can't go with you because we have to wait for this helicopter to rescue Ryan. The helicopter comes, they long line him. They can't land the helicopter. So they put down a screamer suit. So he has to put in a suit. We have to wrap him up, tie him up on the rope. They long line Ryan off the mountain to where our base camp was. Then they can put him in a different helicopter and then bring him to the hospital. And we're on the, they want to pick us up. They're like, we're sorry, you're not in trouble, so you have to stay here. They were supposed to come back and get Ryan's gear. They couldn't because the weather sucked in again and it wasn't safe for the helicopter to come back. So we're like, okay, plotting our next plan. Can Todd and I be strong enough to carry the weight to set this next level? What does it look like? And in the evening, the other team comes back. I have hot chocolate ready for them. I'm all excited. Tell me how it went. They're like, we didn't make it. And I'm like, what? I'm like, we didn't make it. It is way too far of a push. You're not going to be able to go from here. You have to go to the next camp. And then you're even pushing it from there. we're like, okay. So it was nice because they gave us a whole bunch of details and all that kind of stuff. And you really have to watch yourself in these environments because you're dealing with altitude. You have to eat enough calories to have energy to go. You can't eat too many calories at a time because then it takes blood from your fingers and puts it in your stomach to digest things. So you're always doing this balancing game, and only you know your body. So that team comes back. Todd and I decide, okay, we're going to leave some stuff at Camp 3. We're going to go over to Camp 4, which we do. We set up the igloo. I'm exhausted, like emotionally, mentally, all the things. The next day we wake up. We have the best day we've had on the mountain. And Todd's like, we're just going to push from here. I'm like, we are. So we pushed. The team before us kind of set some posts for us, thankfully, so we could go a little bit faster in certain sections because we didn't have to test it. We summited, which was amazing. Came back to Camp 4, then slept the night, went over the pass, came down. We had to carry, I'm like a fanatic about taking everything off the mountain. I'm like, we'll figure it out. So we load up my sled, we load up Todd's sled, and going downhill, the sled can't be heavier than you because then the sled's pulling you down and you're not pulling the sled down. And so I kept being like, oh, I'm sure the sled's not heavier than me. And then the sled would get in front of me, pull me over. I was probably 6 feet from a crevasse one time. And I was like, I'm just going to cut this thing. And it's going to go in that crevasse and it's not my fault. Like that's legit just happened and no big deal. I didn't do it, but I thought about it. We did have to leave some stuff on the mountain. We would cut all the food that we had, dump that and keep the trash with us and just try to cut as much weight as we could with all that food. It felt like that would at least be a little bit nicer thing to leave. We got back to to the town. Ryan was in the hospital. They had a special kind of drug that even in Nepal you get 1 day of, and it's like a vasodilator and it really helps with frostbite. For some reason, this one town in Canada has a 5-day supply. The season's over and they're willing to give it all to Ryan. So Ryan does this treatment for 5 days. He flies to St. George, Utah, where he lives when it's done, and he does a hyperbaric chamber treatment after that and all these things. He's a case study because nothing's amputated, everything came back. You would have no clue he had damage. They're like literally studying the protocol of how this all happened and what they did. But that's like that was my second attempt to Mount Logan, and that's one mountain and one version of the craziness.
I mean, that just in itself, that's so insane. I mean, how nothing, like coming back in one piece seems to be like impossible.
It's a thing, right? Like I didn't know. I was so naive getting into it. I'm like 7 mountains, 7 beaches, sounds good.
Right. And that, by the way, that naivety is a strength, right? Because if you knew what you know, you may have not done this whole thing in the first place, right?
I had to do K2 twice. So if anybody knows anything about mountains, K2 is not one you want to do twice, let alone once. If you really look at the statistics of it. And when you go that first time and you have a terrible memory, like I buried a human, okay? My teammate died in an avalanche and I had to go through all this emotional trauma, even from the standpoint of the climbing season ended in K2 because it was monsoon season. So these areas that you hiked to get into K2 were rivers when you left. And when I say rivers, we got to one spot at 2 a.m. and they sent a donkey to go across and he got washed down the water and they're like, oh, we'll test again in an hour. It's not safe.
Wait, you just said something though. You said somebody on your team died on your, so that, I mean, can you talk about that? I mean, that's really scary. How do you even continue? I mean, and talk about the importance of having a strong team because your teammates are exceptionally important for your survival, right?
Yes. So people are like, oh, all teams are created equal. Not true. You want to go with a climbing team that vets the people that go with them, that have experience on the mountain, that have a plan. So the interesting thing about the year 2021, when I climbed K2 for the first time, I learned a very important lesson. Big mountains take big teams. big goals take big teams. I'm not climbing Everest alone. I'm not climbing K2 alone, and neither are you. The bigger your goal is, the bigger the team you need to make that goal happen. And I lived it in 2021. So 2021, there was a COVID issue in Everest. So Pakistan's like, we don't have the resources to be able to handle that. All these tourists come in. So if you have not been vaccinated, you cannot climb. That shut out all the Nepalese Sherpa. That shut out a whole bunch of teams because they didn't have access to the vaccine at that time. There was a handful of people that had resources that were like, hey, we're going to go climb with this team because they're still going. And I'm like, okay, well, if that person's doing it and that person's doing it, then I trust them. So I'm going to go do it and this will be fine. And I had signs that I ignored, right? Like, I'm like, determination. There's determination. There's stupidity. There was some stupid decisions I made for sure.
Name some.
So like my flight got canceled to go to Pakistan the 2 days before I was supposed to go.
Right.
And only me would be able to find the one flight that was like 5x the original cost that would be able to get me there. And I mean, it was nuts. And my mom's like, I really think you're pushing too hard to make this happen. I'm like, you just don't understand. And so, right? I mean, that's obviously, right? That was the problem. Then we're hiking in. So the interesting thing about hiking into K2, it's not Everest. I wish it was. Like, you don't have tea houses. You don't have people that make you tea. You don't have a shower. You don't have a bed. You don't have anything. You are hiking in with your tent and you're melting water and you're building the tent and you're eating dehydrated food and it's 66 miles and it's this zigzaggy hell, for lack of better words. And my camera guy is with me. And so he's kind of like, we're best friends at this point and we're buddy. We're the only people that speak English on the team. Everybody else is from different countries. We're walking into this camp and two boulders come together and they pinch his ankle, split it open, and he needs stitches now. No one has stitching material. So I run ahead to the camp. I'm like searching everywhere. I'm like, who has a sewing kit? Some girl from Germany had a sewing kit. So we put the needle in a boiling water. We gave Sandro some gummies because that's the only drugs we had. And I helped stitch him together. I mean, you wouldn't let me sew a button on your shirt, okay? Like, but it was no one else was willing to do it. I'm like, okay, fine. So you go into mode, you do it. And they're like, we had to bring a donkey in to hike him out to go to the hospital. I'm like, so now my best friend's gone. You know, this flight that cost me to get here. I have to go by myself further. I'm already late to the expedition. The expedition's already been there, but I came acclimatized from Everest, so I didn't need to be there as long. So I get to the base camp and no one speaks English and they're climatizing on Broad Peak, which is the mountain next to K2. And that's normal. You normally don't climb K2 till you have to climb K2 because it's so deadly. You don't want to spend time on it. So you climb on Broad Peak and do all your acclimatization on Broad Peak. You use that, and then you go climb K2 in one push.
Sounds so complicated. I mean, you need like a physics degree for this. I mean, honestly, how do you even know all that? I mean, like,
it's crazy.
you just do it. Following all this, I was lost at at peak one. Like, there's so much to remember.
So we go to Broad Peak.
Is that crazy?
And there's little signs that things aren't right. We're missing fuel canisters. So we have to be careful on how much we're using the fuel to melt the water, to do the food, to do whatever. We're short oxygen canisters. We're running out of rope. So they're taking rope out of one section that isn't maybe as steep to put it in another section that is a little bit steeper. And we get to this point called the saddle. And we still have a mile to go to get to the top of Broad Peak. And I'm sitting there thinking, from the movie Everest, okay? You know, there's trouble on these mountains at 2 p.m. They bring their own storm in. I don't think we're going to be off this mountain by 2 p.m. based on how things are going. So I think we should go down. Nobody wants to go down because they have this summit fever. So I sit there for an hour. I'm like, I'm going down by myself if no one will go down with me. My friend Rick agrees to go down with me. And we go down. Rick's like, I'm tired. I'm going to camp at Camp 3 and go all the way to base camp tomorrow. I'm angry. I'm going to base camp now. I have the energy. Anger's great fuel. I'm out. He's like, okay, fine. I get all the way down to base camp and I'm like, don't talk to me. I'm going to bed. I have nothing nice to say about anybody here. So I go to bed and at midnight I get a knock on my tent. And they're like, hey, Jen, there's been an accident on the mountain. You're the only person that's been close to being up there. Someone fell on the rope. The rest of the people are stuck up top without oxygen. And we know we have at least 2 people dead right now. Can you help us? I'm like, no, I can't help you. Like this is your job. My job's to be the client. I don't know what to tell you. We lost a lot of digits, a lot of fingers, a lot of hands, a lot of things to frostbite. We get back down. It takes a week to get everybody off the mountain. And now it's like somehow we regroup and it's like everybody feels we're okay to climb K2. And somehow I'm like, let's go. Like all the bad things had to have happened. We're done with bad things. Let's go. I should have been like, you're right. Next year I'm coming back. Thank you, friends. So I go, the funny thing about K2 is it's a triangle. So it's really hard to put camps on K2. I'm one of the fitter people there. So we decide that I'm going to go a day ahead of everybody. And then everybody's going to camp behind me because there's not enough tents for all of us to climb together and sleep. So I go a day ahead. Every morning, you don't climb during a certain period of time because every morning there's avalanches. And there's avalanches that are, you just feel like you're in a bowling alley. You're like, okay, this is the avalanche hour because the sun's hitting the snow at a certain angle. It's heating up. If the snow is heavy and it's going to come down. And then once the avalanche has happened, you're safe to climb. And so Rick is the most experienced person. Him and I are kind of buddies at this point because he speaks a little bit of English and he came down from Broad Creek with me. And I'm climbing this section. I get a call on my radio. And when you get a call on your radio, you have 15 minutes to call back down to base camp because they know like where you are, probably is going to take that long. I get a second call. I get a third call. I get a fourth call. Something's wrong, right? Like your brain is like, something is really wrong. I finally get to a safe spot. I handed the radio to the porters. The porters are talking. I'm trying to pay attention. Like I can understand Pakistani all of a sudden. And they finally hand me the radio and in broken English, they're like, Jen, Rick's dead. He died in an avalanche. Jordan broke his leg, who is the guy that was with him. And Stefan's stuck. He needs to stay on the mountain where he is until it's 5 o'clock where we can send a helicopter and rescue him. Because if we send a helicopter now, the blades sound will vibrate and cause another avalanche and we might lose him. And I'm like, okay, like you hear these stories, but you don't expect these stories to happen to you. And so I didn't even have a place to put it. I'm like, I don't even, what's going on? So we sat there for a minute. I'm like, I need to just sit. I need to figure out what I'm doing. And this other team comes up and they're like, Jen. I realized I'm the only Jen. Yeah. And they're like, hey, your team's going down. Do you want to join us and go up? Do I want to join you and go up? No. My team has a problem. I'm not joining another team. I'm going to go take care of my team. People over peaks, like all day long. So we go down, we bury a human, which was like, and all the things that you have to do to get out of the town. Like I have to go through this river that we lost horses or donkeys on. The United States pulled out of Afghanistan. Afghanistan's neighbors to Pakistan. And so I'm like, it takes me 5 vehicles and airport like security transfer because they're worried that I'm going to get kidnapped to get to the airport. And I get to the airport. I'm like, I don't care what country I'm going to. I'm just getting out of this one. And I got to London. No gear, no clothes, no, like literally the carry-on backpack, my passport and cash. I land in London. I take a shower in the lounge. I go to a teeny bopper store because that's all they had, or like some like glow in the dark Prada that I was not paying $4,000 to wear the rest of the way home. And so I wear this like teeny bopper outfit home. I get to LA. I take the deepest breath. It's one of those like, oh, I'm home. I'm like safe. LAX. I'm feeling safe. Like there's a problem.
Yeah, right.
And I call my nanny. I'm like, hey, I'm not ready to come home. And she's like, it's all right. So I like start journaling and writing and like looking at all the problems that happen and start trying to solve them and figure out what my story is. Because if I walk in that door with a story in my head right now, I'm not able to come back because my kids won't trust me. And so I have to like write this narrative and figure out like, how does it ring true and still put me in a position of power? And I finally came with the story. I get home the next day or two, my kids come home from camp. And I remember my son running in the door and he's like, hey mom, did you summit? I said, no, I didn't, but I had success. My kid looks at me like, well, what do you mean? I said, like, who we show up as people is way more important than anything we'll ever achieve. And I'm proud of myself and how I showed up. And I hope in your life, when you're challenged with this, you make the same decision. And my kid looks at me, he's like, okay. And so for this next year, I have to train to go back to this mountain. And I have to fight the monsters in my head and the stories and the things and all the stuff. And I'm getting ready and I'm just not ready. And I'm not ready. And I book my flight and I'm not ready. And I get a phone call 3 weeks before I need to leave. Hey, Jen, there's this person that's been training to climb this mountain. You think you can help? Yeah, you know what? I can help. So I go back to K2 in 2022. There's a million stories on this second attempt too. Like I get anthrax and like just stuff you can't even believe is real.
You got
Anthrax.
Do you see why she's such a badass? Like, this is like legit. Like, this is a movie. This, a book. This should be turned into a movie. So if anyone here works for a studio, I think this is your next big blockbuster.
So I go back to K2 and I am sick as a dog, thank God, because then I can't focus on the things that would scare me. I get to the top. I become the third American female to stand on the top of the mountain. Save that. 30 minutes later, the first Pakistani female stands on top of her country's prized peak. The first Muslim female stands on top of a peak of significance and declares to the world, maybe your belief has another option. And I share that story, and that's why K2 is so important to me, because sometimes we fail or we have these setbacks or these obstacles in our lives that feel like overwhelming and exhausting. And why would we even do this thing? And it's the universe lining us up to make more possible. And it is so important that we become breakproof in our pursuits because we are so important to each other's story. And we don't even know how most of the time. So, yeah.
Wow.
It's quiet.
No,
Sorry.
because I think it's quiet because I think that it's your story. This is not a usual thing that people hear probably in this type of environment. Like your story is so impactful and it's extraordinary. And so like even with the 7 strategies to build resilience, that's like the subtitle. You already told us a few of them. Can you talk about, I wanted to ask you more about your children in a second, but can you talk about a little bit more of what this has taught you? I love that story you said about your son. That was it's a great one. Can you give us a couple more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really teaches you, this whole pursuit reminds you that it's never the goal, right? The goal gives us direction and it gives us like this boundary of what to say yes to and what to say no to, because it keeps us on track of what we're doing. And like the crazy thing is like we're at the top of these mountains for minutes. Like I was on the top of Everest for 10 minutes. I trained almost 1,300 hours to be on the top of a mountain for 10 minutes. And that's a metaphor, right? Like the journey is where life unfolds and becomes and challenges and exposes us and lets us live. And it's so important for us to have these goals that we need to like learn our edges on and figure out how we're going to show up and what we're going to do. And letting the universe play a role in it and see what's going to happen.
Before you had the car accident, were you somebody who lived on the edge though, who was an adrenaline junkie, or did you have fear? Did you have self-doubt? I mean, this is a very massive thing to accomplish. You know, did you even think you had it in you to even do this?
wasn't even about being in me, because here was the cool thing about post-accident life. Pre-accident life, I was pretty calculated on what I would pick up.
What did you do? Give us some examples of how your life was.
I mean, I would do like triathlon or like something like that. And I'd be like, okay, I know I'm going to be good at this. So I'm going to do this because I'm that person that's good at things.
Mm-hmm.
And after the accident, I was like, I don't care if I'm good or not. I just want to experience it. And that allowed so much more to show up in my life, because it wasn't, it has to look this way or be this way. It was like, here it is. And maybe it's messy, maybe it's ugly, and maybe I fail. Like maybe the book sells 2 copies. It doesn't matter. It was the process of writing or learning about myself and writing that book to myself before the accident and being like, man, this is what I needed when I didn't have this life thing that changed the game. And when you allow that play and stuff, just different things happen.
Like, I know you probably get asked this question a ton, like, now what, right? Like, what are you going to do now because you've done this?
Yeah.
What do you feel when do you have something else that you're planning on doing, or are you just not, are you satisfied with what you have learned and what you have accomplished so far?
I mean, I'm grateful for my pursuit. The funny thing about my pursuit is I came home like feeling pretty good about myself, I had to be honest. And I get off this airplane. My kids are at the airport. My son's like, great job, Mom. I'm like, thanks, honey. I love you. Mom, your breath stinks. I'm like, dude, I've been on an airplane for like hours, but thank you. Like back to life, right? NDD, we're normal. Like, don't let it get into your head, Mom.
Isn't that so true? Like kids will always put you right back into your place, no matter what you are, what you've accomplished.
Totally. And so right now I am truly in a season of rest. And when people ask me what's next, I love that question, because I think we're so trained of what's next, that we forget about what is. And my kids have watched this entire pursuit. If I don't teach them by showing them what it looks like to recover and not be in the spotlight and allow yourself to just recharge and let it look different, where are they going to learn that? How are they going to learn to be present if I can't be present? And so I've really given myself a year to say, I'm not committing to anything else. Right now, it's not that season. Right now, it's just to still absorb and take in the lessons of what happened.
And I want to add, how about contacting with people, like connection with people while you're doing it? Were you able to speak to your kids? How are you able to to check up on them, for them to know you're okay? What's the process with that stuff?
Yeah. So you get really like the nice thing is like a lot of the mountains have Wi-Fi nowadays. I mean, we just climbed Kilimanjaro. We had Wi-Fi. I brought a couple of my kids with me, so
right. You just climbed it. You say it like you just went to the Trader Joe's. You know, I love how you said that. That's what you said to me on the phone. You're like, I'm just gonna go climb Kilimanjaro. I'll talk to you next week. Like it's not usual, right?
But what I like when I was at base camp of Everest, I had Wi-Fi. And the crazy thing about Everest is that my story was, I can't go climb Everest. I have 7 children. That's a terrible mom. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go to show my kid now, how do I be a better mom? I hired nannies. I had my mom come, which is grandma. I went to the kids' school and I told the teacher, I'm like, hey, I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks. And I've never been gone this long. So I just need you, if you could, give my kids a little bit of extra grace over these next 3 weeks. My teacher comes back to me and she's like, you know what? Why don't you teach the kids at school how to set Everest-like goals? And come in and let's do a whole curriculum around this. Mm-hmm. So these kids, like colored hikers, are like, I want to ski a black diamond or make a travel soccer team or whatever. We lined the hallways with it. And we made this huge Mount Everest in the front of the building. And I was a little hiker and they had a tracking device on me. So they could move me up and down the mountain. And then when I was at base camp, I would call into the different classrooms and answer questions about what I ate and where I pooped, right? Because that's all they cared about. So, and then when I climbed the mountain and I was scared, I'm like, I can't be scared. I have like this whole element, like the school's watching, like I got to show them we faced our fears by going through them and all this stuff. And I got to the top. It felt like the whole school summited. I came home. I went in and talked to the school, the kids, and like the conversations, right? The kids are like, I want to climb Everest someday. Well, I'm your coach, so you let me know when. And they're like, I'm friends with your son, and da 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 da. And my kids saw what it was like to be a community and support somebody doing something. They felt what it was like to be loved by somebody besides their mom. And it was just this huge win that my narrow vision going in didn't even see. And I think a lot of us only have this one perspective that until we start doing the thing, we don't get the opportunity to really see how much other people can step in and show up and make the experience so much more than what you thought it was possible.
Yeah, and it takes a village, right? I mean,
Yes.
but how old are your kids, by the way? Tell people.
Yeah. So I have a 17-year-old, a 15, 14, 13, 12, and twin 11-year-olds. Yeah.
Does anybody, are we allowed to open it to questions?
That'd be great.
Yeah, you're probably
Okay,
like, can we
good.
go
I didn't
home?
This I mean, I can listen to this for another hour. Not to say we have to, but it's compelling. Yes, do you have a question?
Is the book about strategies or is it kind of a narrative of the climbs?
So good question. So it is a combination of both. So I'll take the reader to each one of the climbs and highlight a story from that particular climb and then show that lesson and how it played out there and then how you can apply that to your own life and your own goals. And then, like any book, it can only be so long. So there's a lot of stories that didn't get included into the book, which is why I do speaking stuff and things like that. Like we got electrocuted in Russia. I mean, like it's like stuff you can't even make up that, so we talk about some of those things and but it's a combo of things. Yes.
Kilimanjaro with your kids. How was that?
Oh, it was all of it, right? Like I think when something runs the gamut of all the emotions, it combines into the word awe.
Did you take all seven
kids?
children?
No. I took the three
Yeah.
oldest. So 17, 15, and 14.
Okay.
They hated me at first because all their friends were going to Mexico for a typical spring break. And then we got there and the first day was hard. Like the first day is hard. And they're like, Mom, what did you get us into? And then they it was funny because the first day they wanted to get to camp as fast as they could. Like I'm telling you, there's no winning by getting there first. And by the end, they finally figured it out. Like if I get there first, I just have to wait for everybody. So then they started looking at like the creeks and the rocks and the trees and exploring and doing that kind of stuff. At first, they missed their devices like crazy. And then we had a spot where they had access to devices and they made the choice that they didn't even want to look because they realized like this is going to be the same stuff and I don't have time to deal with it. I'll deal with it in a couple days. The summit day, they were nervous and there was some times where they're like, I think we're done. I'm like, oh no, we're not done. And like two of my boys brought friends. And so one of the friends was like, he's done. And they're like, my mom won't let you be done. So you got to keep going. And then we made it to the top and we made it to the top before other teams did. So we had it for 30 minutes and they were ecstatic, right? And it's such an amazing experience because they had to earn it. Like my boys can manipulate their way through a lot of things. There's no manipulating your way up a mountain. Right. And they also had 12-pound packs and they were grumpy. And then they had a porter carrying a 45-pound pack in Crocs, passing them, singing songs, So then we had these conversations about look how powerful enthusiasm is and how much that plays into your entire experience. And so just these lessons that the mountain allows you to play with, that's really hard to teach in another curriculum.
By the way, how many hours a day were you doing the climbs? Like, what's a day in the life? Like, can you walk us through like when there's no avalanches and stuff like that? Like, what would be the day in the life?
So the nice thing about Kilimanjaro and the route that we did is you go through 5 different climates, and you don't have any death risk. Like your only risk is you getting malaria maybe from a mosquito,
Okay.
and
So that's a safe.
It's super safe, like
Okay.
introductory big mountain experience. Your risk is altitude sickness, and that's pretty much it. So some days they do it perfectly, like just like we should do life at some level. You go a big hard day that's maybe 6 to 8 hours, and the next day might be 3 to 4 hours because you're still gaining progress, but you're not pushing hard every single day. You're kind of recovering, but doing an active recovery. And then day 3 is hard, day 4 is easy. day 5's hard, but you have the adrenaline from the climb and the summit being there. And then it takes you 2 days to get out.
Wow. Is there any other questions for Jen? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm curious about the financing. So
Yeah, that's
all
horrible.
of these
Great
mountains are very pricey.
Very
Are
pricey.
they?
Did you try to obtain sponsorships, or like when you had this initial idea that you were doing this?
Yeah.
Walk us through, like, how did you make it happen?
Yeah. So I was very lucky in the standpoint of I was money hungry when I graduated from college. And so I went into finance. Okay. And then I started a financial firm. And before I had kids, I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and was like, this is what we're building. And I was in asset management. And I white labeled an investment platform for institutions to use. And so then that put me in a financial position of saving money for a long time. And then all of a sudden I got in this car wreck. I'm like, what am I saving all this money for? Like my day could be tomorrow, right? And so I had stockpiled quite a bit of capital to be able to make this work. I was offered a couple sponsorships when I was doing it, and I turned it down because my personality is a people pleaser. And I didn't know how I was going to be able to separate making a smart decision and making a decision of something I promised to somebody.
great point.
And so it was something I couldn't do because I just am not good at that. And I know that, and I didn't want to put myself in that situation. It is a really hard sport to finance, for sure. And
How much is it? Can you give us some prices? Because that's a great question.
yeah, so like
Yeah.
the cheapest you can do Everest for is probably 40,000.
Really?
And
Where are the costs? Like, can you tell us? Because that's a great question.
yeah, so you're looking at like the permits to climb Everest are probably in the 14,000 range that the government gets, right? And then you have, and that permit covers, now Everest is so commercialized that they have teams that run the ice fall and they have teams that run these different sections. So your team is just to get you up the mountain. Other teams do all the pieces behind the scenes to get you up the mountain.
So is it 40,000 a person or 40 for your team?
Oh, a person.
So 40 a person.
And you can go to
Okay.
150 a person.
What do you get for 150 that you don't get for 40?
It's a shower that you don't have to share with others, a bathroom.
A bathroom?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
that you don't have to share with others.
Okay.
A tent that they put a cot in that you get your bed off like the dirt, and like one of the best Sherpa, and you're pretty much Middle Eastern royalty to do that.
Really? And what do you get for 40?
A permit.
Wow. So so where did you go to the bathroom and where did you eat?
Yeah. So the ticket is to have Middle Eastern royalty on your team, okay? Because then when they're hungry for pizza, they can call it in from Kathmandu in a helicopter and you benefit, okay?
Oh.
So
Are you allowed to blend teams like that though?
well, so
Could you?
they,
You're paying 40 and they're paying 150.
but they're probably in a different team than me.
That's what I'm saying. How you get the pizza? Like, how would you even?
So
I'm like, I want to.
So even so on my team, like we had tents that you could stand up in. Like you're paying less and you have tents that you have to crawl into. Sounds ridiculous, but after 5 days, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And it's like my guy next to me got COVID, so I used his tent because no one dared to mess with me. Because I was right. I'm
Yeah.
like, really? So I
Yeah.
used his tent for my clothing because he wasn't coming back.
Right.
So I'm like, well, keep everything over there. And my tent will be where I sleep. And we set up like a little movie thing or whatever. But you can have different people within your group pay different prices for different Sherpa that you're climbing with, different amounts of oxygen that you want to use, different tent styles that you want to be in. So they can really a la carte it, right? Like if you go to a montage, you can rent a residence or you can stay in the hotel. You're still going to use the same pool.
Oh, wow. So then when you're climbing, do you get a different Sherpa than someone else? So how many Sherpas per? I was under the impression that the team has one Sherpa.
No.
So how many Sherpas are on this team?
Depends on what you pay for. So you can have one Sherpa just dedicated to you. You can have two Sherpa dedicated to you. You can share a Sherpa with somebody else.
So did you have one Sherpa?
I had one.
One Sherpa?
Yes.
And so 40,000 for Everest. How much are the other mountains? Like, are they all?
It all kind of like that varies. Like I would say K2 is pretty expensive. You're probably 70,000 for K2.
So
And
more than Everest?
yeah, because K2 is way more fatal. 23% of the people that climb K2 die on the way down.
Wow. And did these thoughts enter your mind with your kids? Like, oh my God, I have 7 kids. Like, what happens if something happens to me? Like, did that affect your decision?
That's why I turned around on 2
Yeah.
mountains and had to come back to do them, because the mountain will always be there. So I had to make decisions on like, can I get home from this point? Like, it's not can I summit, it's can I get home?
Yeah.
Because the summit's only halfway.
Because it's always on the way down, right?
And most people
Yeah.
die on the way down. That's when because when you're going up, you're slowly weighting a foothold. So if the foothold's bad, you catch it before you're fully weighted. When you're going down, every foot is fully weighted. So if you made a bad step, you're going.
Did you do this to the three steps on the way down too?
Not for so Everest and K2 are what they call fixed line climbs.
Mhm.
So somebody else is setting the rope and you're just following the rope. My other climbs where we didn't have that. We were setting it all up and figuring it out as we were going.
Did you see dead bodies on the way down?
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow.
But it's like a mannequin. I mean, I don't mean to like make it not sound horrible, but when you are passing these people, there's no energy, there's no life. It looks like a mannequin of an outfit that was 20 years old.
Yeah.
And those people are there because when you go to climb these mountains nowadays, I don't know how it was before, so I don't want to say something wrong, but when you go to climb these nowadays, you say, I want to be left where I died. I want to be taken down. I want to be cut off and like whatever happens, just get me out of the way of other people. And so some people want to be left where they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you I don't know how much
Do you,
time.
write
Sorry.
letter, do you write letters to your kids before you go on these? Because I have a friend that did
do.
Everest, and he talked about writing letters to all his loved ones in case he didn't make it.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, and it really
It's a
makes
whole mental process.
it's a mental process. And like people are like, I became such a better mom when I knew I was leaving, right? And I'm like, I might not come back. So what are these memories that they're gonna have with me? And what are these moments like? And what are we doing? And I made everybody a video, each individually. So anytime that they were really having a down moment, they could look at that video. I wrote everybody a card. We had Hershey kisses and Hershey hugs on the counter in the kitchen, and they were 1,000-fold. So if they ever needed a hug or a kiss from mom, they would go get the Hershey kiss or the Hershey hug out of the jar and do that. I had a device that we could text 160 characters back and forth at any time. You would FaceTime as much as you could, but I mean, I don't know where my phone is right now, but I have one of the letters that I wrote to one of my kids, and like I read it to them when it was done, and like the room that listened to it was like, because you just have to be real, right? Because you don't want them to not chase their thing. Right? Like you want them to be like, hey, I might have died, but I died like not sitting on the couch. I died pushing limits and teaching women like we are our limitation, not society. So like block that out and tune in here and let it be who you are. My mom's an interior designer. Like she loves bookshelves. I don't care if I have nothing on mine, right? Like, but she looks at a mountain. She's like, I don't even know why you climb that thing. That's so dumb, right? But that's because we're unique and different. It's perfect.
Was she scared for you to go out there? She must have been just freaking out.
But she wasn't the first call. But hey, I'm going to go do this.
Yeah, I would imagine not. I would definitely imagine not. My God. Well, is there any other questions for Jen? Yeah.
First of all, I'm just so grateful I get to hear you. Your story is compelling and fascinating and amazing. My question is, can you say one thing that you know about yourself for sure that you would not know if you didn't do this work?
Yeah. Kindness makes me stronger. I think whenever I was failed at something or did something wrong or didn't get to the mark that I wanted to, I'd be really hard on myself. And then I think about that from a standpoint, if you would break a bone, we set it in a cast, we take care of it, we rest it for 6 weeks. Why don't we do that to our emotional well-being?
So you're talking about self-kindness.
Self-kindness. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. Yes.
This has been really compelling, especially I like the parental angle as a dad. I really love like kind of how you're setting an example. Who do you look up to? Like, who inspires you? I don't know if you watched the woman that sailed around the world and Nicole, that was such a great story. Like, Who inspires
Like,
you?
every story inspires me,
Yeah.
right? Like, I get so fired up when someone's doing their thing. I don't
Yeah.
care what your thing is, but you know the difference of someone in it and someone like doing it for sure. You know what? Like, you just can tell that authenticity.
Mhm.
And so I don't care what it is. Like, watching that authentic, raw beauty of just doing whatever that is, it's gorgeous. And it gets me so inspired. I'm like, that's living.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your truth, honesty, and I just got so many pearls of wisdom that I actually took notes on a lot
Oh,
of things
cute.
that you said, just little things. But I came in late, so I'm just wondering, what is the name of your book?
Oh.
Yeah, right here. It's called Breakproof. We have a couple copies.
Great.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Lots of gems. Thank you for the mountain will always be there.
Yeah. No, definitely great.
Yeah, you really are so inspirational because this is, people don't do this every day. And I think that you give people it's like very inspiring that people can usually push themselves way further than they think they can. And you're just an example of that. So it's amazing. I'm so happy that you are here to tell the story. You survived, I should say.
I have a two-part question. My first one is, how did you discern between fear versus I really shouldn't do X, Y, Z? Like, I mean, you had one example of that, but in general, like, how do you go about making that decision?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Discerning between fear versus like I really shouldn't
Can
do
you
this.
mask? Maybe she could say it.
She says, how do you discern between fear of like doing something versus not doing something?
Do you have children?
No.
Okay. So I have obviously 7. And for me, it was really hard to like, I think we're kind of trained to give up on ourselves for everybody else. And after that car accident, I realized like I'm demonstrating self-sacrificing on a regular basis. And I don't want Jana or Julia or one of my kids to live my life like this. Like, they're here with this mission and they need to have the courage to do that mission and their other roles. And so my kids are my why, like all day long, every day. And if I got into a spot like the ladders, I didn't know I was afraid of heights. And I climbed Everest and I wasn't afraid of heights until I stepped on one of those ladders.
Yes.
Not OSHA approved. Okay, like no, like you step on one end and the other end goes in the air and all this things.
Explain the ladder. This is crazy.
And-
You guys don't mind.
I mean, it's nuts. And I'm like, I'm not going across that thing. Like, I have humans. I am their soul. Like, I'm taking care of them. But like everybody else crossed it. So I'm like, okay, it must be safe. And would I want my son to do this? And if I would want my son to do this, then I'll do it. If I don't want my son to do it, I'm not going to do it. And that's been a really good compass for myself because it's easier for me to love them sometimes than it is to love myself. And that's how I taught myself to love myself because I need to show them how to do that.
But you wanted your son to do the ladder? I wouldn't want my son to do the ladder. I'd be scared. So therefore I would have go home.
I am scared, but I'm not like you're tied up on a rope. So even if the ladder falls, you're going to be hanging until they can get you, but I'm not going to not be hanging. I'm not going to go down 2,000 feet. The ladder will. I won't. Because not only are you holding onto the ladder, but they've got your device clicked in a few different ways for safety measures. And the one thing that they don't really talk about on media, because there's just not time to when they're showing those stories, you buy boots, like my boots to climb Everest were a little too big. And then you have those like ice picks on the bottom of them. They're called crampons. And you buy the crampons for your boot so that those rungs on the ladder, those crampons grab. So it's not like I could step through the rung, right? Like it's gonna like so you kind of feel a little bit like a chameleon where you're like, you know, like that type of thing. Now it can get where you're here and this foot gets caught and you're like, you know, and then it comes undone. So that's scary for a second. But if I would wear boots that really fit me and didn't have the crampons correct, then I could step through and that'd be horrifying. But that's one of the safety measures that they do before you even do those ladders. So everybody going across those is making safe steps that way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second part to this.
Yes.
So now you made the discernment that it's fear and not like, oh, I really shouldn't be doing this. So you're safe and you're overcoming fear. how do you get yourself out of, like, if the fears kind of got you in a stranglehold, how do you get yourself out of that and know, like, okay, I can do this? What's your process for getting through that?
Here you have a strategy before you go, right? So you know fear is going to show up. You just don't know how it's going to show up, right? So what helps me get through fear? Like smell. Like I love tangerines and oranges, and I think of like happy Florida. So I would bring, as weird as that sounds, essential oils, and I would put those on my jacket sleeves. And I'd be like, beaches, I'm by the beaches, you know, like, and think of that. I had a picture of my kids. So I would pull that photo out and be like, okay, like we're doing this, you're watching, we got this. I had friends write me letters, and I wrote myself letters. So then when I got into a hard part, I'm like, okay, it's time to pull out one of those letters. And that letter would be like, okay, I know you're scared and that's valid, but what do we do? And that kind of stuff. I had a playlist. So I had certain songs. Like, I mean, I'm not kidding you. That first ladder that I did, I was listening to Vanilla Ice. Okay. Like anything less than the best is a felony. And I'm like, okay, I got this vanilla. We're going. If I was a drug, you'd sell it by the gram. Right. I mean, like, that's how dumb you are, but that's what you need to do. And then you have your team on the other side. They're like, you got this, you're doing this. Like, and when I went to go, the only thing I could do to get to the other side was take a safe step. There's 1,000 things I could do wrong, but the thing that I could do right was take a safe step. And so I literally would say out loud so that I was blocking any other thought in my mind. My mantra was safe step, safe step. Safe step. And by saying that, your brain can't multitask because it's hearing it, it's saying it, and it's doing it. And so now I'm getting across there. And when you get across, you have a party. Like you celebrate it. You get those, because those emotions are the same emotions that are going to keep you stuck, or the same emotions that are going to get you excited. And you need to train your body to be like, this is excitement. This isn't fear. And the only way you do that is if you celebrate those little victories along the way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Whoa, this was such a great event. Thank you both
Yes,
so much.
thank
Copies of the book, and I'll sign those, and we'll get some signing and everything. Thank you guys for such great questions. Awesome.
So cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reliving my own.
Of course.